Nilo could hardly believe what had just happened only seconds earlier. Standing there beside the rain-covered glass windows of the penthouse, with the storm still roaring across the dark city skyline outside, his heart beating faster than it had all night as the memory replayed again and again in his mind with almost unbelievable clarity. Because only a moment ago Lucien Vale, the calm, untouchable man who had built his entire reputation on control, discipline, and the careful distance he kept from everyone, had closed that distance between them without warning and kissed him. Not with hesitation or uncertainty, but with a quiet certainty that felt far more powerful than anything Nilo had experienced since the night he was brought into this strange new life. And even now, as he lifted a hand slowly toward his lips as if confirming that the moment had truly happened, he could still feel the warmth of Lucien's breath and the steady presence of the man standing only a few steps away, as though nothing about the moment had been accidental at all. Only minutes earlier the atmosphere inside the penthouse had still carried the quiet tension left behind by the attempted breach of the security system, the storm outside beating relentlessly against the towering glass windows, while distant lightning briefly illuminated the skyline far below. And Nilo had been standing there with the small black kitten resting comfortably in his arms, watching the rain slide endlessly down the glass while trying to understand how quickly his life had changed in less than 2 days. Because less than 48 hours ago, he had been leaving behind a house filled with arguments and debts he had never created, stepping into a car beside a man he barely knew in order to solve a problem that had never truly belonged to him. And yet now he stood inside a place that felt less like a prison and more like a fortress built around someone who had quietly promised protection without asking for anything in return. Lucien had been standing near the window at that moment, his tall figure outlined by the soft glow of the city lights behind him, while the faint reflection of the storm moved across the glass like shifting shadows, his expression calm in the same controlled way Nilo had come to recognize over the last day. Yet there had been something different in the way his attention rested on him, as if the events of the evening had finally pushed certain thoughts to the surface that Lucien had been carefully keeping contained until now. And when he spoke again, his voice carried that same steady confidence that seemed capable of quieting even the storm outside. He explained that the people who had tested the penthouse security earlier would not act again so quickly, that whoever was watching would now take time to observe and gather information before making another move, because powerful enemies rarely attacked without patience. And while the explanation itself was calm and practical, Nilo could sense something unspoken beneath it, something that suggested Lucien was thinking about far more than just security protocols or business rivals at that moment. The kitten stirred slightly in Nilo's arms then, stretching lazily, as if the tension in the room meant nothing to it at all. And the small simple movement seemed to soften the quiet distance between the two men in a way that neither of them had expected. Because when Nilo laughed quietly under his breath at the kitten's complete indifference to storms and danger alike, Lucien's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. The sharp control in his features eased just enough to reveal something warmer beneath the surface. For a moment neither of them spoke, the storm continuing its relentless rhythm outside, while the city lights flickered far below like distant stars trapped between steel and glass. And Nilo realized that despite the danger surrounding Lucien's world, he had not once felt truly afraid since arriving here. Not in the way he had feared he might when he first heard the arrangement that would tie his life to a man he did not know, because every action Lucien had taken since that night in the rain had quietly reinforced the promise he had made, that nothing would be forced, nothing would be demanded, and that anyone under his protection would remain safe no matter who might be watching from the shadows. It was that realization that finally pushed Nilo to speak the thought that had been slowly forming in his mind since the night before, asking Lucien quietly why he had chosen him at all when there had surely been countless other options that would have satisfied the expectations of powerful families and traditional alliances, options that would have given him heirs and avoid the kind of attention their arrangement had already begun to attract. Lucien did not answer immediately. Instead he stepped closer, the space between them shrinking until Nilo could feel the quiet gravity of his presence in a way that made the entire room seem smaller. The storm outside fading into distant background noise as Lucien's dark eyes held his with a calm honesty that felt far more revealing than any dramatic confession could have been. He explained simply that the night he saw Nilo standing in the rain outside that house, listening to arguments that should never have been directed at him in the first place, he had recognized something rare, not weakness, not desperation, but a quiet strength that had endured years of pressure without losing its sense of kindness or restraint. and in a world where every alliance was calculated and every decision measured by advantage. That kind of quiet resilience had seemed far more valuable than another political marriage arranged for appearances. The answer left Nilo momentarily speechless, because for the first time since arriving here he understood that their arrangement had not been created entirely out of strategy or convenience, as he had originally assumed. Somewhere along the way, something else had begun to grow inside the space between them, and perhaps Lucien had noticed it before he had. The kitten chose that exact moment to leap lightly from Nilo's arms onto the nearby sofa, as if deciding the conversation no longer required its supervision, leaving the two men standing alone only a step apart, while the storm continued crashing against the glass behind them. Lucien moved closer then, slowly enough that the movement felt deliberate rather than impulsive, giving Nilo every opportunity to step back if he wished. Yet when Nilo remained where he was, the distance between them finally disappeared altogether. The kiss itself had not been rushed or overwhelming the way Nilo might have expected from someone whose presence carried such quiet power. Instead, it had been surprisingly gentle, almost careful. The kind of kiss that felt less like a sudden decision and more like the natural conclusion of a moment that had been building since the night Lucien first stepped out of the car in the rain and looked at him, as though his life mattered, which was exactly why, standing there now with the memory of it still lingering between them like warmth in the quiet room, Nilo found himself unable to stop the small laugh that escaped his lips as he shook his head in disbelief. "I can't believe that just happened," he admitted softly. Lucien regarded him for a moment before the faintest trace of a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, subtle but unmistakably genuine. Outside, the storm finally began to weaken, the rain softening against the glass as the first signs of calm returned to the city skyline far below. Inside the penthouse, however, something far more important had already changed, because what had begun as a calculated arrangement between two strangers had quietly transformed into something far more dangerous for a man like Lucien Vale. Not a weakness, but something worth protecting. And as Nilo moved closer again without hesitation, the black kitten curling comfortably beside them on the sofa as if claiming its place within this strange new household. The fortress high above the city felt less like a place built to keep enemies out and more like the beginning of a life neither of them had expected. And the rain first started falling 2 nights ago. And somewhere far below the tower, hidden among the restless lights of the city streets, the people watching from the shadows would soon realize that the most unpredictable move Lucien Vale had ever made was not taking a spouse without warning. It was choosing someone he had no intention of ever letting go.